I'm coming to you with a special edition garden tour from my parents' home in Caswell County, North Carolina. We're just over 40 miles away from New Garden Road, where my gardening journey began just over 40 years ago. That's where my dad had a great vegetable garden, about 1,600 square feet. He grew everything from tomatoes, cucumbers, corn, squash, beans, and okra. More about that okra later. I just loved following my dad around the garden and being outside in nature, free to explore and experience what the garden had to offer me. Fast forward to today, where we find clear and present evidence of my roots in gardening and my appreciation for wildlife. What's up, everyone? It's Scott from New Garden Road. You know I'm here to inform, inspire, and elevate you. Encouraging biodiversity and restoring habitat is my mission, one garden at a time. This property is about 5 acres in total, and my dad maintains about 3 acres of it. It's really just like a park. In describing my dad's gardening style, it's that he's a planter, propagator, and a divider of all types of plants. There are so many beautiful ornamental plants here that provide an array of seasonal color. We're talking about roses, azaleas, peonies, and thousands, literally thousands of daffodils, bearded iris, and daylilies. He shared many of those with me over the years, and I have several planted in my Central Texas garden. My mom has been able to maintain a wide array of container-grown plants. She always seems to be growing some tomatoes and cucumbers throughout the summer on her deck, as well as some orchids and African violets on the inside. There's also quite a few houseplants growing on their giant screened-in porch. I want to show you some special heirloom camellias that my dad grew from cuttings about 10 years ago. These were originally grown by my grandmother in central Louisiana. So this house sits in an area that's heavily wooded, and about once a year my dad has one of the larger trees closer to his home taken down. There are a lot of tulip poplars as well as some oaks and some maples. So I was here a couple of days ago when a crew came out and took down one of those giant tulip poplars. They really made short work of it. This was a huge tree, really close to the house, so it made sense to remove it. It's also going to open up some nice sunlight, and I bet you the peonies that he's got growing in that area are really going to take off now. Maintaining a landscape of this size is a huge task for my dad, but it only goes to show what a joy it can be when you embrace your passion for gardening. Along with all the beautiful ornamentals that you'll find here, my dad still maintains a large vegetable garden. My folks are really into growing tomatoes, and you got several varieties here behind me. They also have a few cucumber plants, some peppers, and eggplants. One thing that I really miss about living in North Carolina is the homegrown blueberries. They've got about a dozen plants here, and they've set up a lot of berries, but they're not quite ripe yet. Let's talk about the okra incident. When I was living at New Garden Road, about 4 years old, I happened to be out in the garden helping my dad, and I was trying to harvest some okra. Well, I say trying, but really I was just taking a knife and stabbing the dirt. Somewhere along the line, I got the idea, or my aim really got off, and I stabbed myself in the leg. Now, since things turned out okay, I can wholeheartedly say that I'm so proud that was my first gardening injury. I still love growing okra, and that's probably one of my fondest memories from my time on New Garden Road. The word on the street is it's a bumper crop season for zucchini. In this garden, in my sister's garden up the road, as well as Honeybee Hills Farm, one of the local organic farms, they've just got it really coming on. I've talked about the squash vine borer moth in a couple of different videos in the past. And this is a pest that my dad has seen in this garden. But this year, the squash and the zucchini in particular are growing really well. He hasn't seen any evidence of that moth or the damage that it can ensue on your crops. I gotta say, however, I was out here just a little bit earlier checking out the zucchini, and unfortunately, I did find a squash vine borer moth. So Maybe they were a little bit later to arrive here in North Carolina. I think that's one of the reasons that getting your squash crop in early can be advantageous. You want to try to get it in ahead of that squash vine borer moth as it emerges for the season, and get some squash coming out before they take hold. When the crew was here taking down that tree a couple days ago, my dad overheard one of the guys talking about his massive zucchini crop, and he was trying to give some to his coworker. I don't get to grow squash like that in Central Texas very much, but when I hear stories like that, it makes me really happy. And while I've been here, I have been eating a whole lot of homegrown squash, so I'm getting my fill. I also noticed that my dad has got a tomato cage on one of these zucchini plants. I thought that was really interesting. It looks like a really great way to encourage upright growth and make harvesting a little bit easier. A couple of other things to note from the vegetable garden here. I was out inspecting the plants and I did see some squash bug eggs. That can be one of the most pervasive pests for squash along with the borers, and they should be observed for and removed aggressively. You just don't want them taking hold and coming back in larger numbers year over year. My dad was telling me about some of the mulch that he had dropped in the garden. It was some fresh chipped mulch. So what happened was, a little while back when he was having one of the trees taken out, he asked the crew to leave him some of the chipped mulch. There was already some mulch in the back of the truck in addition to what they had ground freshly on the property. And that is where my dad thinks that things went wrong. Unfortunately, you can see in the pathways here that we've tried to maintain in this raised bed garden, there's some Bermuda grass coming on. So somewhere in that load of mulch, there was some grass seed. And that's something that you should be aware of if you're getting some free mulch. So my dad's got another big pile of mulch adjacent to the vegetable garden, but he's afraid to use it. But what I recommended to him was maybe he could test it out. He could take some of that mulch and spread it in an area away from the garden and keep it watered and see if anything germinates. And that could be one way to find out or test that mulch before you put it near the vegetable garden. This property is truly a habitat for wildlife. There are numerous bird baths and bird feeders throughout, and my parents probably have about half a dozen hummingbird feeders. Most of them are located right outside a window, and the ruby red-throat hummingbird is a frequent visitor. I've also been noticing several species of butterfly, including the eastern tiger swallowtail. And on this visit in particular, I've been noticing a lot of dragonflies. There's a pretty large container in the vegetable garden where we planted some lavender a few years ago. And when I checked on it this visit, it was being visited by numerous bumblebees and other pollinators. This represents the principles that I hold dear of encouraging biodiversity. Not only is it beautiful, but it attracts wildlife and fosters a natural balance in the garden. It's a very special place to come hang out for a little bit. Get some space, get some quiet time, get some nature, and get back to my roots. Now check out more awesome gardening videos on my channel. Like this video if you like it, and follow New Garden Road for weekly content. You can grow your own food. Keep it organic.